Hello and welcome back to Write America. Write America is a literary series spearheaded by author Roger Rosenblatt in an effort to bridge the great divide in our country through readings and conversations from award-winning, nationally renowned authors and new and emerging writers. I'm Lauren, Book Review's publicist and event coordinator, and for those of you who are not familiar with us, Book Review is Long Island's largest independent bookstore established in 1977. I'm just thrilled to be here with you for another episode of Write America. This is week 8, so we have really hit our stride here. Tonight we are featuring authors George Howe Colt and Fadiman and Carl Philips. So if you happen to miss last week's episode with Linda Paston, Paul Harding, and Juan Felipe Herrera, or any of the previous episodes of Write America, you can go to Book Review's Crowdcast channel at any time and watch the recordings. Every event is recorded. This one will be too. So if you missed something and you want to rewind and go back, you'll find the recording there. You can also share it with anybody who you think might enjoy the conversations and reading this evening. But before we get started, I would like to give you just a little tour around Crowdcast, just in case this is your first time here with us. Right below the stream, you'll see a blue button. If you click that button, it'll bring you to our website, bookreview.com, where you can purchase signed copies of George, Anne, and Carl's books. There is also, Major Jackson's here tonight. Excited to have you back. We have a button down here that says ask a question. So if you have a question for any of the writers during the conversations and the reading, you can just submit a question down there. We're going to have an audience Q&A at the end of the chat. And then you have the chat on the side here. Feel free to comment about the event, drop your emoji, applause, all that good stuff. All right, well, I think that's about it. We are going to get started. Our first reader tonight is Carl Philips. Carl is the author of 15 books of poetry, most recently Pale Colors in a Tall Field, which comes out tomorrow. You can buy it at bookreview.com. And Wild is the Wind, which won the Los Angeles Times Book Prize. His other honors include the Aiken Taylor Award for Modern American Poetry, the Kingsley Tufts Award, the Penn USA Award for Poetry, and fellowships from the Guggenheim Foundation, the Library of Congress, the American Academy of Arts and Letters, and the Academy of American Poets. So please welcome Mr. Carl Philips. Let's pull him up on screen. Hi, Carl.
Boom, here I am. Hi.
And there you are.
Thank you.
We are excited to have you here. I'm going to leave you for your reading.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Lauren. So thank you, everyone, for being here. Thanks to Lauren for organizing us and doing all the publicity. And I really want to thank Roger Rosenblatt for inviting me to be part of Write America and for his having the great idea to pair me with Anne Fadiman and George Colt. I'm really honored to be reading with both of them tonight. So I'm going to read mostly from my book, Pale Colors in a Tall Field, which, as Lauren said, actually I kind of forgot, but it is coming out in paperback tomorrow. So that's fun. And maybe a couple poems from the previous book that Lauren mentioned, Wild as the Wind. And I'll just start. Here's the title poem, Pale Colors in a Tall Field. Remind me to show you where the horses finally got freed for good, not for the freedom of it, or anything like beauty, though their running was for sure a loveliness. I'm thinking more how there's a kind of violence to re-entering unexpectedly a space we never meant to leave, but got torn away from so long ago, it's more than half forgotten. Not that some things aren't maybe best forgotten, at a certain point at least. I've reached that point in my own life, where there's so much I'd rather not remember, that to be asked to do so can seem a cruelty, almost. Bad enough some days that there's memory at all. Though that's not exactly it. It's more what gets remembered, how we don't get to choose. For example, if love used to mean rescue, now it's more gladiatorial. Who said that? Not the one whose face I've described somewhere as the sun at that moment when, as if half unwilling still to pull itself free from the night's shadow grove of losses, it first begins to appear. No, not that one. And not the one whose specialty was making a bad habit sound more excusable by calling it ritual. Since when do names excuse? Wish around for it long enough, you can always find some deeper form of sadness where earlier, so at least you thought, mere sorrow lay. I'd been arguing the difference between the soul being cast out and the soul departing. So I still believed in the soul, apparently. It was that long ago. All right, I seem to already have skipped a line in my first poem, but maybe that's good luck. Okay, the next poem is called Tugging the Arrow Out. And I don't usually say much about poems, I just read them. But this is one that I wrote the day after the 2016 election. And I like to think it's a bit about resilience, tugging the arrow out. There's a nudging that a living horse will sometimes extend toward a dead one. A nudging not so much against death, what is knowable to a horse, but not understandable, but against that space right before loneliness settles in for real, that horses do, it seems, understand. And so that was the first day. The night was what night always is, a black starfish, black according to some for holiness, to others for the limbs themselves, unfurling as if from long sleep or a late stiffness, or as when a quiet thing and very still starts moving, moves, one stiff black limb at a time. All right. This has a bit of an unwieldy title. A little closer, though, if you can, for what got lost here. Other than that, all was still. A quiet, so quiet that, as if silence were a kind of spell and words the way to break it, they began speaking. They spoke of many things. Sunset as a raft, leaving the water in braids behind it. Detachment, the soul, obedience. Swans rowing at nightfall across a sky filled with snow. What did they wish they could see that they used to see? To mean no harm, or to not especially just now be looking for it. What would they wish not to see could they stop seeing? Courage mattering so much less than not spooking easily. Maybe all nerve is. The search and rescue map wildflowers make of a field in summer. Deserving it versus asking for it versus having been asked and been softly turned from. They said it would hurt, and it does. It does and it can, but that is not a reason to despair. Which leads me to this poem, which is called Gold Leaf, for reasons that are too complicated to explain, but that's what it's called, Gold Leaf. It's also one long extended fragment, so don't go searching for a main verb. To lift without ever asking what animal exactly it once belonged to, the socketed helmet that what's left of the skull equals, up to your face, to hold it there, mask-like, to look through it until looking through means looking back through the skull, into the self that is partly the animal you've always wanted to be, that, depending, fear has prevented or rescued you from becoming, to know utterly what you'll never be, to understand in doing so what you are, and say no to it, not to who you are, to say no to despair. Seems an important thing to say to despair if you have to spend some time with it. Fine. Let me see. Look at my program here. Okay, this is called What I See. What I see is the light falling all around us. Yeah. To have understood some small piece of the world more deeply doesn't have to mean we're not as lost as before. Or so it seems this morning. Random bees stirring among the dogwood blossoms, a few here and there stirring differently somehow, more like resisting stillness. Should it come to winnowing my addictions, I'd hold on hardest, I'm pretty sure, to mystery. Though just yesterday, a perfect stranger was so insistent that I looked familiar, it seemed easier in the end to agree we must know each other. To his body, a muscularity, both at odds and at one, with how fragile everything else about him I thought would be if I could see inside. What's the word for the kind of loneliness that can feel like swimming unassisted in a foreign language for the very first time? I don't know. That's why I didn't answer the question. Okay, I'm finishing with two poems. This one's called, it's very short, this one. It's called Overheard Under a Dark Enchantment. Compassion first, we were told. And if that won't work, compassion's shadow, pity, to smooth what's rough. We find just holding the victim's hand lately has been exactly enough. Little rhyme there. Huh. Occasionally, I tip my toe into tradition. Okay. And I'm going to finish with this poem called Defiance. Some say the point of war is to make the need for tenderness more clear. Some say that's an effect of war, the way beauty can be. Homer's Iliad, for example, or many centuries later, how the horse's head, to protect it in combat, would be fitted with a chafron, a strip of steel, sometimes mixed with copper, all of it hammer-worked, parts detailed in gold. I love you as I've always loved you, one man says, meaning it to another. That doesn't make love true. This only needs to be troubling if we want it to be. Our minds are as the days are, dark or bright, says Homer. The words like coral bells in a pot made to look like the head of an ancient god, a sea god, moss for seaweed across the old god's face. To believe in ritual in the name of hope, there lies disaster. And turned to him and took his hand, the scarred one. I could feel the scars. Little crowns, mass coronation. For by then, all the lilies in the pond had opened. Thanks very much.
All right, that was beautiful. Thank you, Carl. I'm just a disembodied voice here for a minute while my camera turns back on, so just bear with me for a second.
Oh, sure. I'll just keep smiling.
So much. You're right. You look great. Thank you. I am going to turn your camera off, and we will see you for the discussion at the end. All righty. Okay. All right. So we have our second reader, Anne Fadiman. Anne's most recent memoir, The Wine Lover's Daughter, was an NPR Best Book of the Year, and her first book, The Spirit Catches You and You Fall Down, won the National Book Critics Circle Award for Nonfiction. Anne is the Francis Writer in Residence at Yale and a Fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. Please welcome Anne Fadiman. Let's get her up on screen. Hi, Anne.
Hi, Lauren. How are you?
Hi, lovely to have you this evening.
Oh, it's great to be here.
I'm so excited to hear what you have with us. I'm going to leave you to it.
Thank you. And I just love that I am called Ann Fadiman and George Colt. I'm married to George Colt, but I've never thought before that I incorporated his very being into mine. But maybe that's what marriage is. First of all, thank you, Carl, for that wonderful reading. And George and I are so honored to be on with you this evening. Can't wait to hear you talk more about your work later on. And thank you, Lauren, for presiding over all of these glorious Monday evenings. But thanks particularly to Roger Rosenblatt. Roger asked me only because I've known him since I was a 17-year-old college freshman, and I had the temerity to ask whether I could audit his graduate seminar on the Abbey Theater, and he had the foolhardiness to say yes. So, Roger, it's been a wonderful half century. So last November, when Roger first asked George and me whether we would be on Right America, I was assuming that I would read from some recent work. But then I started thinking about something that Roger said about how he hoped that the purpose of this series was, as he put it, to remind our injured nation of its best self. And then on January 6th, George and I were watching the Capitol insurrection on TV, and I saw a rioter beat a police officer with an American flag. It had never occurred to me before that moment that the flag could be used as a weapon. And soon after that, my son asked to borrow a stamp, and I handed him a forever stamp, which happened to have an American flag on it. And he said that he would rather not use that because if he did, he was afraid that people might think he was a Trump supporter. And at that moment, I realized that I couldn't read anything recent. I wanted to read an essay that I had written a few months after 9/11 about the American flag. So here is an excerpt from A Piece of Cotton, which is from an essay collection called At Large and at Small. When we bought an old farmhouse last summer in a small New England town, the elderly couple who had lived there for many years left us a set of plastic lawn chairs, a garbage can, a tool bench, a wheelbarrow, and an American flag. 2 days after 9/11, we raised it with our children's help to half-staff. Our 6-year-old son enjoyed pulling the halyard. On its way up the peeling white-painted pole next to the big maple tree in the front yard, the flag made an interesting and satisfying sound, partway between a squeak and a ring. We'd read up on half-masting protocol, which dictates raising the flag briskly to the peak and then slowly bringing it halfway down. George said, "This flag is lowered now, but it will rise again just as our country will." It is useful to have children around at such times. They authorize cliches that their parents deeply believe, but might otherwise hesitate to voice. Neither George nor I had ever owned a flag, not even a little one to wave on the 4th of July. The closest George had come was the pair of stars and stripes bell-bottoms he had worn in the 60s, in violation of Section 176D of the United States Flag Code. The flag should never be used as wearing apparel, bedding, or drapery. The closest I had come was the handkerchief-sized whole earth banner that I had knotted to the aerial of my brother's car in the fall of 1970. We took the whole earth idea seriously. What a provincial notion, I remember thinking, to fly a flag that implied one was a citizen of only part of the world. The critic George Packer wrote recently, "September 11th made it safe for liberals to be patriots." Like me, Packer had once considered flag waving an embarrassing display of bad taste. In a million years, I would never have dreamed I would ever fly a flag. In March of 1918, a year after the United States entered World War I, a mob surrounded a Montana man named E.V. Starr and tried to force him to kiss an American flag. Starr refused, saying, "What is this thing anyway? Nothing but a piece of cotton with a little paint on it and some other marks in the corner there. I will not kiss that thing. It might be covered with microbes." Starr was charged with sedition, fined $500, and sent to the state penitentiary for 10 to 20 years of hard labor. What is this thing anyway? I thought. Is it just a piece of cotton? Is it, as Katha Pollitt put it, explaining why she had refused her daughter's request to hang a flag in their window, a symbol of jingoism and vengeance and war? Or is it, as a group of New York women wrote in the dedication of a silk flag they had sewn for Union soldiers in 1861, the emblem of all you have sworn to defend, of freedom and progress with order combined, the cause of the nation, of God and mankind? In the weeks after 9/11, newspapers printed full-page color flags for readers to tape on their windows. NBC put stars and stripes on its peacock. When I visited my mother in Florida, the window of the gift shop in the Fort Myers airport contained the largest collection of red, white, and blue objects I had ever seen. Flags, streamers, keychains, pens, fans, t-shirts, baseball caps, figurines, coffee mugs, beer steins, shot glasses, and menorahs. But just because most of the flag craze was dreck didn't mean that all of it was. One night in October, I was glad to see George watching the World Series. Until then, we hadn't felt able to watch any television programs that did not deal with 9/11. Flying above center field at Yankee Stadium was a torn flag. It was damaged like New York City itself. It was shaped like an oriflamme, the banner the King's army carried in 12th century France, split at one end with flying edges like two flames. The flag, which had flown somewhere inside the World Trade Center, was found in the rubble and nearly disposed of. Flag Code, Section 176K. The flag, when it is in such condition that it is no longer a fitting emblem for display, should be destroyed in a dignified way, preferably by burning. The Port Authority intervened, and Sergeant Antonio Scanella, a police officer who had lost 13 of his squad's 18 members at the World Trade Center, became the flag's unofficial caretaker, saying, "You can't throw an American flag in the garbage." In my view, a perfect flag calls up less passionate associations than, for instance, the flag flown by the 16th Connecticut Volunteer Regiment in the Civil War. When surrender was inevitable, the soldiers tore that flag into fragments to keep it from falling into enemy hands. A historian named F.C. Hicks wrote in 1926, "The regiment, some 500 strong, was sent to a prison camp where most of the men remained until the close of the war. Each piece of the colors was sacredly preserved. When a soldier died, his piece was entrusted to a comrade. At the end of the war, the weary prisoners returned to their homes, each bringing his bit of star or stripe with him. All those torn fragments were patched together, and the regimental colors, nearly complete, are now preserved in the State House at Hartford." We kept our flag at half-staff longer than President Bush decreed that we should, and then after raising it to full staff, we continued to fly it after most of our neighbors had put theirs away. Maybe we were making up for lost time. Maybe we needed to see our flag flying in order to convince ourselves that even though anti-Muslim protesters marching near a mosque in Bridgewater, Illinois, had waved American flags, we could choose another meaning in Whately, Massachusetts, the one a Chicago Flag Committee had in mind in 1895 when it called the stars and stripes our greater self. I had not looked closely at our flag when we raised it, so I decided to take it down one day to see whether it was made of cotton or silk. It was a raw afternoon in early December. Freezing rain was falling on gray patches of snow. Section 174C of the Flag Code prohibits display in inclement weather, but a handful of diehards in our town were still flying their flags, rain or shine, 24 hours a day, so we had followed suit. The flag was sodden and looked like a shrouded bat. When I lowered it and detached the grommets from the halyard, I could see that it was made of nylon. Black letters printed on the hoist, so faded I could barely make them out, read Dura Light. The red stitching that connected the stripes was beginning to bleed. The embroidered white stars were fraying. As I refastened the brass clip, I tried hard to keep the old, wet, shabby flag from touching the ground. Thanks.
All right. Thank you, Anne. Again, I am just trying to get my computer working. All right. And okay, I'm just going to turn you off for a second. All right. So now we have, last but certainly not least, our third reader tonight, George Howe Colt. George is the best-selling author of The Big House, which was a National Book Award finalist and a New York Times Notable Book of the Year. He is also the author of the books Brothers, November of the Soul, and The Game. Let's please welcome to the screen George Howe Colt. Hi,
hey,
George.
Lauren. Hi. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. We'll leave you to it.
Okay. I'm all alone now. Thank you so much, Lauren. And I want to thank Roger Rosenblatt for inviting me to be part of this venture that over the last 6 weeks has been so inspiring, provocative, and moving. And for providing me and Anne with a wonderful weekly date night. Each Monday night at 7 o'clock, we meet over supper in front of the computer and experience a kind of literary dinner theater as we listen to a murderer's row of great American writers. And I also want to say how pleased I am to be sharing the video screen with Carl Philips. One of the great things about Write America is it brings together different writers, different pairings, like a wine pairing, and seeing what happens. And you meet new writers and you hear new writers and you also listen to familiar writers. But over the past week, Anne and I have had a wonderful time really immersing ourselves in Carl's most recent book, which is just lovely and read so beautifully. So tonight I'm going to read two selections, both of which in a really tangential way address something in Roger's mission statement, in which he wrote that Write America might attempt to address the deep divides in our nation. And the first piece I'd like to read is a short essay I wrote in 2008 for a fundraiser for Barack Obama. And it deals with the same period of time as Anne wrote about in A Piece of Cotton. 7 years ago, on a Sunday afternoon in October of 2001, I drove up to Ashfield with my wife and children for the annual Fall Festival. We had moved to Western Massachusetts from New York City about a year earlier, and we still occasionally pinched ourselves at our good fortune in having landed in a place where the stars in the sky turned out to be stars and not jets circling LaGuardia. It had been less than a month since the events of September 11th, and like everyone else in the country, we were feeling brittle and raw by turns. But now, on this cool fall day, we cautiously allowed ourselves to give in to the fiddle music, the pumpkin donuts, the sunlit jars of honey, the leaves falling from the maples that ringed the field in which we walked. At some point, while our children were off playing homemade pinball games, Anne and I paused in front of the makeshift stage where a band was playing country music. After a few songs, A man appeared from backstage and whispered into the ear of the lead singer, a pigtailed, middle-aged woman in cowboy hat and boots. The singer's face brightened. She turned back to the microphone, looked out over the crowd, and in the kind of triumphant voice one might use in interrupting a dinner party to inform the guests that the Red Sox had just won the World Series, she announced that American fighter planes had just begun to bomb Afghanistan. The news wasn't unexpected. We had to do something, I knew, yet in my liberal solipsism, it wouldn't have occurred to me that anyone could feel something other than what I felt, heartsick. But the woman, her face radiant, clearly expected her announcement to be cause for celebration, cheering, fist pumping, perhaps even a chant of USA, USA. In the moment of shocked silence that followed her announcement, it suddenly occurred to me that my fellow fairgoers might indeed react that way, and if they did, how disappointed I would be in them and perhaps in myself for having so misjudged our new home. Well, they didn't. There were no fist pumps, no cheers, just a hush, and then an anguished murmur as they turned to one another in their pain. The singer, looking confused, even crestfallen, hurried the band into its next song. That scene has stayed with me ever since as a kind of emblem of the disconnect I've felt, a disconnect that has grown exponentially over the last 7 years, so that even as I have come to feel more and more at home here in Western Massachusetts, I have felt less and less at home in this country, a country whose government seems to believe that its every blunder should be met with a Pavlovian woof of approval by Congress, by the media, by its citizens. A government which, in citing that curiously awkward phrase, homeland security, as a defense for its every excess, seems to have forgotten what it is about our homeland that makes it so worth securing. A government that, in attempting to make our homeland secure, seems oblivious to the havoc we've wreaked on homelands beyond our borders. Which is what brings me here today, in 2008, in what I'm ashamed to admit is one of my first forays into organized political activity since 1960, when, as a 6-year-old in suburban Boston, I joined my friends in singing, "Whistle while you work, Kennedy's a jerk. Vote for Nixon, he will fix him, whistle while you work." Although I felt a vague unease about the propriety of rhyming Nixon with fix him, I had no idea what I was saying or about whom I was saying it. And in my ignorance, I misunderstood the meaning of fix him. I got it into my head that this Kennedy fellow must have been damaged or injured, like a broken toy, and Nixon, in an act of bipartisan largesse, was in some unspecified fashion going to make him better, to fix him. A half-century later, it's our country that's in dire need of fixing. And though I'm not naive enough to believe that one man, even a man as extraordinary as Barack Obama, can fix it, I do believe that this election, for the first time in many years, perhaps even since 1960, offers us a candidate whose vision, intelligence, and charisma, and whose understanding that there are no simple fixes, can inspire us to do the work necessary to make this country once again a homeland worth securing, a candidate who understands that our home is part of a larger home, the entire globe, and a candidate who understands that the bombing of another country, whether justified or no, is an occasion not for exultation, but for soul-searching and regret. A lot has happened since 2008. Now, when Roger gave his writers their marching orders, he said that if the spirit moved us, we could read something by another writer. So for my second and final reading, I'd like to pivot from 2001 back to 1884 and read a short poem by Walt Whitman. He wrote it not long after the 1884 election in which Grover Cleveland defeated James Blaine. It had been an extraordinarily bitter and divisive campaign, but it would end with what our country has always taken great pride in and had more or less taken for granted, at least until the election of 2020, and that is a peaceful transition of power. Now, Whitman saw a lot that was right as well as a lot that was wrong in America, but he had great faith in what he called the cleansingness of the electoral process, the cleansingness. I like that word. You won't find it in any dictionary, just in Whitman's head. And I wanted to read this poem because it provided for me something of a cleansing following the election of 2020. It's an exuberant reminder of what democracy can and should be. So here is Walt Whitman's Election Day, November 1884. If I should need to name, O Western world, your powerfulest scene and show, 'twould not be you, Niagara, nor you, ye limitless prairies, nor your huge rifts of canyons, Colorado, nor you, Yosemite, nor Yellowstone, with all its spasmic geyser loops ascending to the skies, appearing and disappearing, nor Oregon's white cones, nor Huron's belt of mighty lakes, nor Mississippi's streams. This seething hemisphere's humanity, as now I'd name, the still, small voice vibrating, America's choosing day. The heart of it, not in the chosen, the act itself, the main, the quadrennial choosing. The stretch of north and south aroused, seaboard and inland, Texas to Maine, the prairie states, Vermont, Virginia, California, the final ballot shower from east to west, the paradox and conflict, the countless snowflakes falling, a swordless conflict, yet more than all Rome's wars of old or modern Napoleon's, the peaceful choice of all, or good or ill humanity, welcoming the darker odds, the dross. Foams and ferments the wine, it serves to purify. While the heart pants, life glows. These stormy gusts and winds waft precious ships, swelled Washington's, Jefferson's, Lincoln's sails. Nothing quite like Whitman. We're just getting in, plugged back in, ground control to Major Tom. Hi, Carl. Good to see you again.
Likewise. And thank you both for your readings. This is great.
Thank you for yours. I really felt while you were reading as if I were taking a warm bath, both in your beautiful vocal quality and the gentleness of your voice, but also in the wash of words that were so beautiful that I sometimes got lost in them, and then had to claw my way back. And it was just lovely. And as I said, Ann and I have been reading your work this week and really appreciating and looking forward to more and getting back into that.
Well, thanks. Yeah, I always find poetry is a harder thing to hear sometimes. Depends, but I always think it's best to take it in the way one would if you went to the Met. And there's almost too much going on, so it's okay to just leave and have a few impressions that you felt something. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway, I was also thinking, listening to both of your readings, I was thinking about the different ways that we approach this idea of I guess I want to say Americanness, citizenship, patriotism, and the healing aspect that Roger was talking about. And I just like the range of that. But I feel as if where we all come together in our readings is something about the vulnerability of individuals. And it's the thing I was thinking about this when Roger sort of gave us our charge, because my immediate thought was, I don't know if I write things about this, but on the other hand, I do think that literature is great at reminding people that we're actually all vulnerable and we're not alone in that, and including our not only their fears, but even these differences about. I was thinking about the flag, because I too have this reluctance to have anything with the flag on me or near me. But I feel as if it's not a connection often to me, to other citizens. But I realize that even our relationship to the flag is a kind of intimacy. And even if we have different views about it, the fact that we even care or put any energy into thinking we do want to display it or we don't, I don't know, shows that we share something. I don't know if that doesn't sound too Pollyanna-ish.
Well, I would never imagine, could never conceive of displaying the flag now. And there was that brief period after 9/11 when liberals could, and I feel that it's been snatched away from us again, and that makes me really sad. But the notion of vulnerabilities and commonalities makes me think about a beautiful reading in one of the earlier evenings of Right America, where Alan Alda read an old essay of his that was about the famous Christmas truce of 1914. So it was in the middle of World War I on the Western Front, and around Christmas, people stopped fighting and they gave each other food and they sang Christmas carols together. And for a very brief period, vulnerability is just the right word, because what if the other side had taken advantage and kept on shooting, but they didn't? Of course, the sad thing was that then Christmas was over and they all started killing each other again.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's the whole subject of, well, patriotism, but also human connection. It seems so fraught. It's especially seemed fraught for me. I'm sure for many people in the last 6 months. It's because it's so easy to become divisive and to, I don't know, perhaps it's why I find it easier to think in a smaller scale in some ways. I was thinking, George, when you read the Whitman poem, a poem that I really like a lot, but I started thinking, oh, I think I gravitate towards the more intimate Whitman. I was thinking of, what is it? I saw in Louisiana a live oak growing, and just talking about loneliness in a way, and not knowing how he would be able to live alone without some companion. And somehow when I read that, I feel as if, yes, that is a peculiarly American feeling. It's not about patriotism in some way, but maybe it's connected with the hugeness, at least in his time, of the landscape still, the way one could feel small inside it. I mean, I know many people think of that poem as sort of homoerotic too, which it is, but it seems as if it's really so much about just needing some reminder that someone else is out there. And I think I'm kind of missing that, because if anything, quarantine has made me sometimes think, I think I'll stay put when it's okay to be out. I think I'll stay right here. I've been perfectly fine on my back porch. But
well, two things. I was when you were talking, I was also thinking about what might, I don't know enough about Whitman to know what the connection was or the relationship between that big public patriotic Whitman, "Oh America, great, beautiful, boundless," and that, as you mentioned, the small inward Whitman. I think of him in his, alone in Camden, hobbled, and by 1884, I think he may already have been sort of, he was obviously getting old and so forth. But that whether he needed the great big patriotic oompa to compensate somewhat for the vulnerability inside, but that may be getting into Freudian territory.
Yeah, I don't know. Although sometimes I think he just wants to remind us that we're both things, that we're a big collective, and we're each very, very sort of slightly frightened people, and united strangely in that. So it's sort of like this tug of war between public and private. I don't know. Yeah. I haven't analyzed it clearly.
Well, I wanted to also know, you mentioned about maybe just staying where you are, and Has the pandemic and the cataclysmic events of the last 4 years, have they changed what you write or the way you write at all? Or, can you sense it, or have you sort of just continued in your trajectory?
For me, it hasn't changed that much, but I think it's because I've always written, to me, writing has always been a kind of way of creating this wedge between myself and, not to sound dramatic, but the unbearable. And so it's a temporary staving off of whatever's coming at me. So in some ways, this just becomes, it rolls right into something like, whether it's pandemic, police shootings, Congress being stormed. These are all the kinds of things. It's not that I don't want to face them, but I sometimes think that in order to face them in my daily life, there needs to be this sort of pocket of what feels like brief rescue in the form of writing. I don't know, how has it been for the two of you during this period?
Because we've been at home together, we haven't been lonely. Mm-hmm. Also, for a time last spring and summer, our 2 adult children were with us for longer than the 4 of us had all been together under one roof since our daughter was in high school, which was how many years ago?
Probably about 12, 14.
Yeah.
Like that.
So we were incredibly fortunate in that we didn't get ill, and we felt an enormous amount of family togetherness at the same time that the rest of the world was suffering. But I know the feeling also of the world seems kind of scary now. And I speak even as a doubly vaxxed person. I'm so used to huddling that it's going to be very hard to go back. I can't wait to teach in person again, I hope next fall. And I'm terrified of teaching again in person next fall.
I think for me, the events of this past year have almost had a somewhat crippling effect on my writing. I feel, particularly, I guess, as a middle-aged white man, that I'm loath to. I was working on a memoir, as a matter of fact, and I've sort of let go of it for a time because I'm one of those people who I just want to, as best as I can for a verbose person, shut up and listen and read. And so I spend a lot of my day reading and trying to read things and see things in a different way, be educated by what others are writing, by what my children are telling me, and so forth. And so I haven't been writing nearly as much. The only thing I've written is going back in time and writing an essay about Henry David Thoreau and how much he loved ice skating. So it's provided a sort of escapism, thinking about Thoreau on his own, and so forth. So, but it's affected my reading, my reading greatly. I sort of try to expand my understanding of history further. And then at night, I do retreat to Dickens and Trollope, and I escape. I use what literature can be, which is a soothing escape.
Yes, Lauren's telling us to stop.
Oh, well, I don't want you to stop, but we do have some questions that I definitely would like to get to before we end. So let's jump to that for a little while. Ruby Park has a question for Anne. What is your perception of the American flag now with the rise of recent COVID-fueled racial violence?
I hate what the flag has become, and I'm afraid of what the flag has become. I honestly think that moment when the rioter used the flag as a weapon, in a way turned the flag into a weapon. And this breaks my heart, but I would never display the flag now. Perhaps essentially for the same reason that my son didn't want to use the forever stamp with a flag, that people would think that I was one of them. If I could have a little sign next to the flag, which we still have in a drawer, and our flagpole is still there that we hadn't put up, but our predecessors in this house put it up. It's still there, peeling even more. If I could have a little sign next to it saying, no, I'm not one of those people. This flag symbolizes our best self, then I'd do it, otherwise not. And that makes me really, really sad. The flag has been weaponized.
We have to take back the flag. Let me see here. This one is from Trisha. This is for all three of you. In the USA, where is the discourse given the divisions? Where is the dialogue, the points of commonality?
And where is it given division? And where is it? Where are the points of commonality?
Yeah, where is the discourse given the divisions? Where is the dialogue, the points of commonality?
Yes, George?
Well, I was, this is sort of slightly tangential, but I was thinking of the way writers, what writers can do in any time, but it's something that I think it was Alice McDermott was talking about 4 or 5 Write America sessions ago. And she was saying that what writers can do is create worlds that people can enter into. She was talking about when she was, as a reader, she doesn't go into other work to find herself. She goes in there to learn another person's world, just the way that I go into her work to learn about Irish Catholicism on Long Island. And and I feel as if my humanity, or this, now I'm getting, grandiose, but that I've been enlarged inside and I have more understanding or empathy or whatever for the common humanity in all of us. So I think as writers, I have a really hard time writing something like, well, I'm going to reach out and create a dialogue and with somebody else. I wish I could. Even the piece I read about for the Obama fundraiser was really a divisive piece, because I was saying, I don't understand this country western singer who wants us to applaud for the bombing of Afghanistan. I didn't go up to her and say, I'd like to know better where you're coming from. I othered her, if you will. So.
I see that Major Jackson is here tonight. So Major, you said something really wonderful in your evening that I haven't forgotten, which is that your students were always praising pieces of writing for being relatable, and that you were a little suspicious of the word relatable, because one of the reasons that you entered into literature was not to learn about people similar to you, but about people who were different from you. I do think sometimes we can learn to relate to people who are different from us, but even if we don't, even if a work is not relatable, well, gosh, the very fact that we've chosen to read it is making us larger. So I don't know whether that's a point of dialogue exactly, but it is certainly a way to prevent us from getting as narrow as we seem to be getting.
I agree, and I think so much of this is accidental, at least for me. I didn't set out to write poems that could be what apparently they were seen as in the 90s as kind of a space that not many people had explored, about queerness in particular. To some extent Blackness, but mostly queerness, and really about being marginalized for whatever reason. And yet there have been many people who have sort of said, oh, that became a way for me to sort of have permission to be open about who they were. And fine. And I've thought about this during this past year or so, because sometimes I've kind of doubted myself and thought, Carl, all these things that you care about that are happening in the news, but you're not writing about them. And are you failing somehow? But I've always trusted that if I just write about what it is to be this particular flawed human being in a body, that everyone else is a flawed human being in a body too. And there are points of commonality, but they're not ones that I can predict. But I think that's where I agree that it's great to read all kinds of things, and not because of this, I'll relate to this because this person looks like me and I want to know about that. That can be great sometimes, but I often choose things that aren't about any of that. I'm rereading, of all things, for the first time since high school, when I read it 4 times, The Lord of the Rings. And I thought, sometimes I
My
feel like it
favorite.
all began for me, all poetry began for me through hobbits and elves, and there's nothing about race exactly, and dwarves, I guess, are a different race from elves, I don't know. And there's some homoerotic stuff, but for some reason, it speaks worlds to me, even now in my 60s, and I hadn't expected that. So, yeah, who knows where the discourses can, by chance, happen.
Yeah.
Okay. Now this one is from Kellen. A thread among the three of you at this moment of relentless enraged yelling, conspiracy theories and hate radio. Can writers help us remember how to listen, reserve judgment, be thoughtful for a minute, not need to overpower everyone in order to not feel overpowered or ignore ourselves?
Yes.
Yes.
Absolutely.
I mean, I think I'm getting back to Carl's poems. I think, the poems themselves and the way he reads them, they creep up. They demonstrate the vulnerability. They allow ourselves to be vulnerable and touch on points of vulnerability in us as we listen, and then we, can feel and.
And poetry of all forms of writing has words that are the most carefully chosen, and it's the most oral and aural genre. Carl, as we mentioned, George and I have been reading your most recent book, Pale Colors in a Tall Field, and the words are wonderful on the page. They're even better when we get to hear them in your voice. But in order to understand a poem, you have to listen. You have to listen to its sounds. You have to listen to its rhythms. You have to listen. The reader of a poem has a much more active role, but I like to think that in general, readers have active roles, and that the more carefully they listen, the less loudly everyone else has to speak.
I think that's true. And I actually think literature in general also just, for me, I want it to be an invitation not to have to feel you have to resolve or solve something. I think a lot of the shouting and loudness sometimes is very, very straightforward. That's fine. But I think the more complicated parts of being a human being aren't that simple, and that silence is actually required a lot for reflection. And I think good literature does that. And which doesn't mean there's not room for the kinds of things where I'm not provoked into silence and reflection. Sometimes it's just pure entertainment. That's exciting too. But yeah. End of sentence.
All right. It's 8:00, so we have time for we have two more questions. Let's see if we can get to both of them. This one is from Matt. George, your essay was written for a political candidate in 2008. Since then, there seems to have opened a gulf between what democratic politics on the one hand and radical progressive thinking on the other can achieve. What is the role of writing in bridging this gap and imagining something new for America?
Anne and Carl, do you want to take that? No. Well, I think we've sort of talked about that. A writer needs to write what he or she or they, are going to write, and respond in the way that feels most right and integral for that person. And if it does touch on, these subjects, I think that all of us are writers who shy away from the shout and so forth. So I think it's more of a glancing thing. I don't consider myself somebody who's able to either answer that question or to take on those, that kind of role, except by, as I take in my reading, as I read what I'm going to do, however that I take that in and it comes out of me as a writer, it's going to come out that way. And if that helps bridge the different strands of the Democratic Party, then so much the better, and I'll take full credit for it.
That sounds good to me. All right, and our last question for the evening is from Nancy. Nancy says, America is not Europe. We seem to be wilder and crueler, with many of our citizens seemingly still caught up in our myths of cowboys, rebels, and outlaws. This is a little doozy of a question. Truly, how do we make sense of this country? If you can come up with an answer to that, I will gladly listen.
Sense of it, not by making a single sense of it. It seems to me that the errors that politicians make, particularly in divisive times rather than times that are uniting Americans, are saying, we are one thing. This country is one thing. My platform is one thing. My solution is one thing. We can't say anything about Americans that will make them all alike. It seems to me that's the wonderful thing about our country. And I would hate anybody to tame all the wildness that Nancy asked about.
Yeah, and there's a lot of, I mean, we haven't said much about it, but I think that something that's very different from between us and Europe is the history of Blackness in this country, and it's so deep in the history from the beginning, and I'm not sure how that part gets unraveled ever, and because it's more than, you know, we're the Wild West and all of that, but or what we're seeing now with the anti-Asian actions that are happening, just another manifestation of something that seems, of course there's racism in other countries, but it seems a peculiarly American thing here, and the way it plays out seems different. So yeah, I don't know, but I do sort of believe that there's at least, if there's a sort of hope in literature, because I feel like just writing is resistance to silence, and you know, I'm not going to change the situation of race, but I can still be here as an example that it's not going away, and I can articulate my thoughts, and maybe a few people start to think, oh, he's actually a decent person, you know, and they can overlook seeming differences between us.
Mm-hmm.
In short,
right.
I don't know the answer to that question.
Yeah. I think
it's a hard one.
I think just more people reading, more people writing, but reading. And I know that, Carl, you studied the classics in college and taught Latin. And it reminds me that when something Francine Prose said when asked what she was reading, she said she was reading Plutarch and Suetonius during the pandemic. And I think that, you know, I go back as far as Dickens, but then, and I think that one of the ways we, you know, learn from Europe and learn is to go back to the great writing of the past as well, and to try to draw what we can from it. And I think so. I think that's great.
All right. Well, it is 8:05. I think this is a good place to end here. I feel like every week we come to an end and there's a new theme for each episode. And I feel like this one was kind of, George, to quote you from earlier, shut up and listen, right?
I probably should have shut up myself more.
So that I'm going to work on that this week, a little more shutting up and a little more listening too. But I want to thank all of you, George, Anne, and Carl, for being here with us this evening. You had beautiful readings, very thought-provoking. I'm so happy to have been able to spend another Monday night this time with all of you. Thank you all, everyone who tuned in tonight. And of course, Roger Rosenblatt for dreaming this whole thing up and getting us together here. So we will see you next week on Monday at 7 o'clock for Write America. Bye.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.